As we entrench ourselves into the second quarter of the 2024 fantasy football season, we're starting to see more teams go more towards a committee running back field or running backs that are just taking over the #1 spot altogether. So it's important to know that these rankings are going to be for the rest of season in 2024. So make sure to go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support because I'm doing my very best to make sure we all win our championship this year. So going down to our first tier, we've got two guys here. These are my two favorites for sure. Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry. Now you may be wondering, why isn't Kamara in this tier? What about Kyren Williams? What about Kenneth Walker or somebody like that? Here's the difference between Saquon Barkley and Henry and those other guys. With Saquon Barkley, obviously he's been fantastic in fantasy football. Nothing has been better than him when he's actually been out there. This dude's averaging 23 fantasy points per game, and there's a couple things that separate him. The great offensive line that he runs behind, and the potent offense that he has on top of him with everybody healthy. With Saquon Barkley, I expect him to continue this reign throughout the entire season, where I have more concerns with those other guys that we'll get to here in a little bit. And then with Derrick Henry here, it's very similar. Derrick Henry has a great team that he plays with, the Baltimore Ravens, and they're just rolling offensively, and it's a playoff team. So I just want a running back on a playoff team, especially one who can dominate at the level that Derrick Henry does on a week-to-week basis here. Now, I don't prefer him over Saquon Barkley because I ultimately don't think that he's going to be able to handle that kind of workload every single week because he's an older player, but I do love Derrick Henry still, of course, with this Baltimore Ravens offense. And then dropping out to our next tier right here, I've got Alvin Kamara and Kyren Williams at 3 and 4. So with Kamara, I just have more concerns with his offense than I do with Saquon's and Derrick Henry's. I've got concerns that Alvin Kamara in the Saints offense is a sinking ship. I said it before the season, they started out hot, now I'm feeling that way again. With Alvin Kamara, the dude's almost 30 and they're using him so much. It's like, when do the wheels fall off at some point? Obviously, he's been fantastic and the receiving upside's there, giving him a very safe floor. But moving forward towards the back half of the year, I do have a little bit more concerns about Alvin Kamara than I do with Henry or Saquon Barkley because the Saints really don't have anybody else. And then a Kyren Williams at number 4 here. With Kyren Williams, I just kind of feel that he is in a position where right now he is being stretched to the thinnest. Like, I don't know how he could get more important to this offense than he is right now as we enter week 6. The good news potentially is that reinforcements may be coming. Cooper Kupp may be coming back after the bye week at some point, and Puka Nacua hopefully comes back sometime towards midseason. So with those two guys coming back, that inevitably will take some pressure off Kyren Williams because I think he needs help. But obviously, when I'm talking about Kamara, when I'm talking about Kyren's, you need to understand that these guys are elite options in fantasy. I just don't have them in tier 1 because I don't see their situations as flawless. Kenneth Walker at 5, James Cook at 6 to round this tier out. With Kenneth Walker, I actually kind of feel similar in a sense to Saquon and Derrick Henry, where it's like, I really like the Seahawks offense. They're very talented. Their offensive line has improved a little bit as far as run blocking goes, not pass blocking very much. But Kenneth Walker does have injuries that he's already been dealing with here, and there is the Zach Charbonnet factor in there. Now, with Kenneth Walker, I don't deny that he's the better running back. I think he's an elite talent. But there is the problem here with Zach Charbonnet. He does take over a couple drives. So we're splitting hairs here at the top. You guys have to understand that. I love Kenneth Walker. He's a top 5 guy. James Cook at number 6. With James Cook, I ultimately just believe that as the season goes on, the Bills are going to continue to kind of see hot and cold weeks, right? Like, so the last several weeks haven't been super hot for the Bills. James Cook recovered in week 5 for good fantasy performance, but I do think that there's going to be more explosion games coming for James Cook. I ultimately do believe that this offense, when they're firing on all cylinders, is really hard to stop, and that includes James Cook being a massive part of this team. So with James Cook, the inconsistency of the offense gives him a little bit of a bump down compared to Kenneth Walker, but I love James Cook moving forward. Now, dropping out to our next tier right here, I've got Breece Hall at number 7 and Jahmyr Gibbs at number 8. So with Breece Hall, obviously it's a hot topic of conversation. What do you want to do with Breece Hall at this point? Do you want to sell him or should you buy him right now? I'm still leaning on the side of a buy. Now let's get the negatives out of the way. Obviously, they fired their head coach, Robert Saleh, this week, and it just looks like chaos in that building right now. Their offense looks atrocious because they have the worst offensive coordinator in the league with Nathaniel Hackett. The positives here, when the Jets are winning games, they're running with Breece Hall. I think at some point they're going to figure that out if they have any brains in that operation whatsoever. Number 2, Breece Hall has been an elite player in the past, and he was elite to start the season. So with Breece Hall, I just feel that there's a recovery coming. It's tough right now. It's tough sledding. He was a first-round pick. I get it, but I ultimately still do have faith in Breece Hall recovering. And then Jahmyr Gibbs at number 8. He's just part of the most effective running crew in the entire league. There is not a single team in this NFL organization that has mastered a 2 running back system to perfection like this. Jahmyr Gibbs, I still prefer him over Montgomery. The reason being is because he's prone for more explosion games because he's explosive and he handles the majority of the targets between him and Montgomery. So there's just more opportunities on a weekly basis when you give Gibbs like 14 or 15 carries, but then he gets 5 targets on top of it. There's plenty of opportunities here for both of them. I just prefer Jahmyr Gibbs because he has the more explosive play upside. And then Jordan Mason here at number 9 with James Conner at number 10. With Jordan Mason here, this should answer a lot of questions. I've been getting a lot of questions for obviously the majority of the season because of the Christian McCaffrey disaster, and especially lately because there's a lot of reports coming out on McCaffrey. Jordan Mason, I still believe, is a top 10 back for the rest of the season. The reason why I believe this way is because I've said this over the weeks. I'm an idiot. I'm not a doctor. But as far as I'm concerned, everything I'm reading about this is like they're so careful. They're operating so carefully with Christian McCaffrey right now, like they're trying to avoid an Achilles tear that is about to happen. I mean, that's literally what it looks like to me. Again, maybe I'm stupid. But the way I see this is like, for every positive report that I see about Christian McCaffrey, I can show you a -1 too. So with Christian McCaffrey, I just don't really see him coming back this year until I'm proven otherwise. I have Jordan Mason as a top 10 back. I'll give him a bump down just in case Christian McCaffrey gets back, and that's why he's at number 9. And then James Conner at number 10. James Conner's been really good. I mean, really, like, if you just watch him on the field, he's efficient, and he's obviously handling all the backfield work in Arizona right now. The problem I have with Conner is that this offense is really hot or cold, so it's like Conner does have some of those bust games in him. We've already seen one this year. That's the big problem I have with Conner. And so, just with the inconsistency in Arizona's offense, I love James Conner, the player, but I do ultimately worry about what his upside is, especially at the end of the year, because usually you can kind of bake in the last several years that he misses a couple games due to injury. He's an older player. It's okay, because James Conner, when he's on the field, is going to give you a lot of upside weeks. And then David Montgomery to round the tier out. As I just said with Jahmyr Gibbs, there is not a better offense at 2 running backs than Detroit. I mean, it's insanity to really think about it and say, we have a single team in the NFL with 2 running backs inside the top 12 in fantasy football. That's ridiculous to consider. So with Dave Montgomery here, I just don't have any concerns about him long season, because as long as they continue to use the same type of system and they don't put too much on Dave Montgomery, maybe it prevents him from getting injured this year, and he's getting a solid 15 to 16 fantasy points per week. And I'll tell you one other thing that I'm absolutely positive on. Brock Purdy hitting higher than 0.5 total yards on Thursday night, because that is what his projection is on Underdog this week. And if you're interested in getting in on it and you haven't done it already on Underdog, go down in the comments, grab the link that's there, and when you use code FFN to sign up for Underdog, not only will they match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 of bonus cash, but you'll also be able to get in on this sweat-free projection this week for Brock Purdy and in other future weeks. So going down to our next tier right here, with Devon Achane at 12 and Brian Robinson Jr. at 13, they're obviously 2 different situations right now. Devon Achane has been a disaster ever since Tua left. I mean, it has been horrible, and it has been horrible for everybody who owns Devon Achane in fantasy, like I do in a lot of redraft leagues. Because it's like, you know that this guy has a super high ceiling, but at the same time, he's hitting all his floor weeks, and his floor weeks are super, super low. So what do we ultimately see here with Devon Achane? Well, I know for a fact his upside is not going anywhere. Let's get that out of the way. Number 2, when Tua Tagovailoa comes back, which apparently, as of right now, is week 8. That's going to be a very good thing for Devon Achane, and it opens up not only Achane, it opens up the whole offense. And I think that's ultimately what the crux of the argument is for me, which Devon Achane is not a workhorse back. He never was going to be What he is he's a cog in a greater system in Miami that's run by Tua Tagovailoa. And when when Tua, the system is running, all those cogs, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane, when everything is running good, they're all running good as well in fantasy. So ultimately, I do have a lot of hope for when Tua returns for Devon Achane in fantasy football. That's why I've still got him as a top 12 back, and I think he's a good buy low this week. And with Brian Robinson Jr. here, I think that ultimately what concerns me with Brian Robinson is I know at some point this offense is going to see a decrease in production. It is simply historically impossible for the Commanders to continue to do what they're doing the first several weeks of the season here. It's so hard to do. So with Brian Robinson, I do have concerns. But with that being said, he has totally separated himself from his draft price. This guy, I was big on him in the offseason. He's efficient, and he's getting rushing touchdowns because of the rushing quarterback aspect here. It keeps defenses on their toes. They can't stack the box against Brian Robinson because they have to account for the real threat that Jayden Daniels is. This is sustainable for Brian Robinson Jr. I just don't really consider him personally as a top 10 running back. And then to round out the tier, Jonathan Taylor at 14 and Joe Mixon at 15. With these guys, they're both injured obviously right now. Jonathan Taylor may come back this week. With Joe Mixon, this has been a real problem this year for me. I'll get into that in a minute because with Jonathan Taylor, when he's been active, like he's done really well, especially those last 2 weeks where he was active for the Colts. So he was starting to hit his stride, and I think the Colts were starting to figure out what they needed to do offensively. I think they had a lot of hope for Anthony Richardson heading into the year that he could start to take over a real throwing role in this offense. Obviously, we've seen that's not going to happen. So they had to rely on Jonathan Taylor, and he's obviously an elite running back who's very capable of doing it. So I just have a lot of hope for Jonathan Taylor when he comes back because the offensive line is really good, and Jonathan Taylor himself has shown to be really efficient and explosive still. And then with Joe Mixon here, this has been my problem with Joe Mixon all year. Joe Mixon, before the start of the year, I was not big on him. The reason is because I thought he was injury prone, and I just really didn't think he was a great player. Obviously, I was wrong about that. Joe Mixon was fantastic with Houston the first week, and he looked good in week 2 until he got injured. Obviously, this ankle injury is lingering, and that's a problem here because he missed a lot of time in the offseason. So what are the chances that Joe Mixon comes back and comes fully healthy? I know I said that the first time that he got injured here and he came out and he did really well, but what are the chances that he comes in at the first week back, whenever that is, and plays really well again? I've got concerns with Mixon, but ultimately, because of the offensive upside, I do still like Joe Mixon in fantasy. And then dropping out to our next tier right here, J.K. Dobbins, Kareem Hunt, and Josh Jacobs at 16, 17, and 18. With J.K. Dobbins, I've said this for weeks now, I considered him a buy low really up until this point. I think he's been a really good buy low. And with J.K. Dobbins here, it's ultimately a belief that I have in 2 factors here. Number one, I've always liked J.K. Dobbins, the player, and I've been really happy to see the efficiency he's running at and just how good of a player he still is. And they're starting to give him more responsibilities in Los Angeles. Number 2, I say this all the time. Jim Harbaugh does 2 things. He runs the football down your throat, and he plays physical defense. We're seeing that with the Chargers, and it's not really a timeshare anymore. Gus Edwards is becoming irrelevant fast. J.K. Dobbins is in a tough spot sometimes when he takes on defenses like Denver and Kansas City, but J.K. Dobbins, there's ultimately going to be a lot better weeks for him. And then Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt, we need to reevaluate because obviously he came in on Monday night against the Saints in Week 5 and was dominant. He had over 100 yards rushing and handled 20-plus carries. This is their guy, number 1. So really the ultimate question is, does Pacheco return? This went unnoticed. I really didn't notice this at the time, but several weeks ago with the injury, Andy Reid said there was a possibility he doesn't come back this year. So I do have concerns about Isaiah Pacheco coming back or not. Obviously, he's on the IR. We don't really have any updates as far as right now goes. But with Kareem Hunt, you just have to factor in this guy at the very least is going to be their starting running back probably until like mid-November. So I just have a lot of confidence in Kareem Hunt continuing this because he plays for the freaking Chiefs. And then Josh Jacobs here at 18. With Josh Jacobs, it's been subpar. There's no question about it. What ultimately brings me back in with Josh Jacobs, because I know this is kind of like a hamster wheel, is that he's been efficient for the large part, and he plays on a great offense. And there are games where he does handle a lot of carries. So I ultimately just am like, when is that big breakout game going to come? I just think it is. Like, numbers should support a big breakout game based on volume and efficiency here. Because this offense is really good. They're a great offensive line. I have confidence in him, but there's no denying that he hasn't been great in fantasy so far this year. So kind of take your pick. Would you rather buy him right now or would you rather sell him? I don't really have a problem with either, but I do have confidence that Josh Jacobs has good weeks in the future, and he probably looks a lot similar to what he is right now, which is subpar in the future as well. Dropping down to our next tier. It's been a long time coming, and there's some good names here that I really love. Chuba Hubbard at 19 and Nick Chubb at 20. With Chuba Hubbard, this is a player I have loved for the entire calendar of 2024. I love Chuba Hubbard. I was big on him in the offseason, and he's obviously done amazing work with the Carolina Panthers. He's been their consistent lone bright spot on offense here. With Chuba Hubbard, there's two things that concern me. Actually, at this point, Jonathan Brooks doesn't concern me, because Chuba Hubbard has done enough in this offense to really warrant, at the very least, a conversation that he continues to man this backfield. What are the chances that Brooks comes in and does better than Chuba? Not very high. The thing I'm really worried about is just the Panthers, man. They're still the Panthers. They're a horrible run organization. They could easily go back to Bryce Young, and that definitely lowers the ceiling here. So I just have a problem with the offense here. With the instability with Carolina, it bumps him down in my rankings, but I still really want Chuba Hubbard because everybody else isn't valuing him as high as he really should be. And with Nick Chubb, we have a possibility that we see him here pretty soon. Nick Chubb may be coming back to this offense, and it will be glorious just because we won't have to see Jerome Ford play anymore. So Nick Chubb will come back and probably be eased back into it for a little bit. And you also have to factor in the Browns are terrible, and their Browns offensive line is not good right now. It's not been what it has been in years past. So with Nick Chubb, you gotta temper expectations a little bit, but obviously the player we know him as, I'm just hoping it's in there somewhere because he's such a beast. This is his second major knee injury of all time, and I have confidence in the player. But there's definite issues here. Obviously, I'm not going to go too crazy with this one, but I'm really looking forward to seeing Nick Chubb back, and definitely should be a buy right now in fantasy football. Ramondre Stevenson at 21 and Travis Etienne at 22. With Ramondre, ultimately, it's just a problem with the offense. They suck. Their offensive line is easily the worst in the entire league. It is atrocious. And Ramondre Stevenson, I get it. He's done well in fantasy. His performances alone should warrant him being higher than Nick Chubb. Possibly even Chuba Hubbard, Josh Jacobs, right? So, like, I get all of that. And Ramondre Stevenson, I would like him more if he didn't play for the Patriots. I get it. They're going to Drake May in week 6. Ultimately, this just does not change the fact that Ramondre Stevenson, I believe, on the long end of the season, is just not going to be able to produce this way in fantasy football because his team is horrible and the offensive line is horrible as well. So I just think that Ramondre Stevenson is going to be a decreasing player when it comes to his fantasy football value in future weeks. Travis Etienne rounded out at 22. Obviously, he's a major question mark as well. With Travis Etienne, he obviously is starting to look like he may be sharing or possibly ceding the backfield to Tank Bigsby. There's also questions about whether he gets traded or not before the deadline. I actually think that'd be really good for his upside. I think that I would like Travis Etienne much better if he got traded to a team like the Cowboys. I would love the potential of Travis Etienne on a different team. So it really does depend on what Travis Etienne does, because ultimately if he stays with Jacksonville, I do think that he's going to be around this area because Tank Bigsby has kind of made himself to a point where you can't really ignore what his production is. So I'm definitely lower on Travis Etienne at the moment. Dropping now to our next tier. Aaron Jones at 23 and Chase Brown at 24. Aaron Jones here, obviously, it's been such a great performance that we've seen in the first month. But he is obviously going to miss the next several weeks at the very least with a hip injury. This is a week-to-week issue. I don't think that Aaron Jones is going to be coming back anytime within the next couple of weeks. Aaron Jones is going to miss time. And this is ultimately my problem with him before the year, is that over the last several years, he's just been a more injury-prone player. So with Aaron Jones, it's hard to rely on him later in the season because he's an older player and he's dealing with injuries already here. So Aaron Jones, I just have issues here, but obviously, if the dude was fully healthy right now, he'd be much higher because the Vikings are steamrolling people. It's sustainable, but he is just not a sustainable player in the long run, I think, because of the age factor and because of the fact that he's just been an injury-prone player the last several years. Chase Brown, I prefer him at Zach Moss. I'm over Zach Moss at this point. It's not that Zach Moss is a bad player. Obviously, he's been good for them. He's done a serviceable job. Chase Brown is just more explosive and efficient. I don't think that if you're the Bengals offense, you can look at the production of the two players and convince yourself that Zach Moss still deserves more touches than Chase Brown does at this point. Especially now because the Bengals are desperate. They need to start winning games and putting up tons of offense because their defense stinks. The guy who does that the best is Chase Brown. He gives you the best opportunity. Objectively, on a per-touch basis, he is simply better than Zach Moss. Efficiency says it, and film with your eyes says it as well. I've got Chase Brown at 24 with big potential to move up inside the top 15, honestly. And then 25 and 26 round out the tier, DeAndre Swift and Tony Pollard. I get it, Swift may feel low. Swift obviously has had a great last 2 weeks in fantasy football. I'm sure I'll hear about this one. I understand it. I have to let you know though that DeAndre Swift, I've never been big on him personally, and the first 3 weeks in the season proved why. I mean, that guy looks like a different player today than what he did the first 3 weeks. So with DeAndre Swift, I just ultimately am like, does this keep up? And do the Bears continue to stick with the run when they get in more competitive matchups? Because that's the problem with Swift, is that they abandon the run too, and he hasn't been that efficient unless he's getting a lot of work. So with Swift, I still got questions. I like the direction of Chicago's team as a whole, so maybe I'm shortchanging him here. Let me know in the comments. And then Tony Pollard at 26. I think that Tony Pollard is just on a sinking ship team as well. The Tennessee Titans are bad. I mean, it's not even, I think their defense is actually good. Their offense, though, if Will Levis is their guy, it's terrible. And even if it's Mason Rudolph at some point, they don't have tons of upside. They may be less mistake prone, but Tony Pollard's going to suffer as a result. It's similar to Ramondre here, except the problem with Tony Pollard is he still shares work with Tyjae Spears. So I just think there's even lower upside with Tony Pollard. And there's a lower ceiling because sometimes they're getting in positions where they're not able to run the ball consistently. So with Tony Pollard here, I just prefer guys like Chase Brown who are on more explosive offenses and Aaron Jones who are on more explosive offenses than I do with Tony Pollard on the Tennessee Titans. And then dropping down to our last tier right here. You're seeing his name, Christian McCaffrey at 27. I said it earlier. With Christian McCaffrey, I may be an idiot, but I'm telling you this, until I see reason to believe otherwise, I am very, very stuck on the fact that I don't think I'm going to see McCaffrey this year. Every report that's positive, I'll show you a -1 too. Christian McCaffrey, they are slow playing this injury so hard, and they're being so cautious with everything with him. It tells me this is an Achilles tear in the making. So I'm going to have him here because the value of the player himself is so elite and extreme in the fantasy football community that he deserves a spot in the top 30, and potentially maybe he does return. And I am an idiot, right? So with Christian McCaffrey though, I'm not banking on him coming back. That's why I've got him at 27 here, just in case that he does come back, he's still inside the top 30. Rico Dowdle at 28 and Austin Eckler at 29. Rico Dowdle, maybe we saw the breakout. Maybe it just happened. I'm a little indifferent on it, to be honest with you. I think the Cowboys are much like the Bears. They abandon the run quite a bit. So with the Cowboys here, I've just seen too many games in recent years with Mike McCarthy at the helm. They're just not a run-first team. So with Rico Dowdle, it's very clear that he's taken over the backfield, 100%. But Rico Dowdle is still in a position where I just do not trust this offense and how much they're going to stick with the run. And in future weeks when they're taking on divisional opponents like the New York Giants or taking on a Detroit Lions this week, for example, where there's a tougher run defense, I've got issues with Rico Dowdle on the long term. And then Austin Eckler at 29. Listen, Austin Eckler has been so much better than I thought he would be. I mean, it's crazy. Like, I did not expect anything from Austin Eckler before the year. Austin Eckler, he's getting manufactured work in this Commanders backfield. I mean, it's target opportunities and it's carries, and he's been really stinking efficient on everything. And the way the Commanders offense is running, they're 4-1. they may win the division. I mean, it's very, very possible. So even though I think the Commanders will have a big down week at some point, I think it's been made pretty clear at this point that the Commanders are a for-real team and a for-real offense, and I want pieces in it, and I think Eckler is on one of the few teams where 2 running backs inside the top 30 makes perfect sense. And then Devin Singletary to round it out. He's very much on the border for me. I hope, actually, he gets replaced by Tyrone Tracy because I think he's the better player. But the reality is they did pay Singletary the money in the offseason, and he's been serviceable for them. He has not been bad for most weeks. With Singletary, I ultimately still do have concerns with the groin injury and with Tyrone Tracy, so he's tentatively at 30 for now, but he could easily drop, and Tyrone Tracy could easily move up past him in the future weeks. So let me know what your team record looks like, and if you want to see the top 30 wide receivers for the rest of the season, click on this video right here.